the American Society of Civil Engineers has asked for about $2.5 trillion in infrastructure improvements over the next 10 years. The amount that's in beyond, our we have a regular maintenance level that's in the budget, probably in the order of about $500 billion a year, that oddly is given out in sort of scattershot ways and doesn't actually solve a lot of the problems, to the point where you can use it for whatever infrastructure you want. So a lot of cities, especially big cities, end up using it on just road maintenance, just paying effectively their local sort of DOT projects. And if they have a bridge that's literally collapsed, they'll use that money to fix it. But until it does, they'll go, okay, we'll do some potholes. We'll fill in some potholes with this money. And or in some cases, they will, like in the case of Kansas City or in the case of Cincinnati, where, a lot of attention has gone to the bridge in Cincinnati, they'll build a parallel bridge. Instead of fixing this one, they'll build another bridge alongside of it. And then one day they'll just go, okay, nobody drive on this bridge anymore. No drive on the old one, drive on the new one. And so there's just two next to each other. And so how to actually step up into that 2.59 trillion number, which we're not getting to even on this one, even though it looks like we will be injecting more money into the potentiality of infrastructure growth than any other time in history since we built the highways or Hoover Dam level projects. Right. This is the creation of it. You can take this money, you take a chunk of this money that's allocated out of tax dollars currently, and you can pour it into these infrastructure projects, and you can get right on them and fix them. And that's done today. That will be, there'll be arguments about what's shovel ready and what's not. And a lot of the local politicians that are always engaging in shovel ready projects, if you know what I'm saying, comedy jokes about politicians. And those folks will end up spending that money either on the stuff they've been directed to because the bill gets specific in some ways. Because that's one of the tricks about this thing, is that they've got to go, all right, you're fixing that bridge, you're fixing that road, you're fixing those train tracks, and you do it with this money. It's not like a block grant kind of, or a soft wash, and you've got a lot of wiggle room and loopholes to get out and spend it on other projects. You got to be, it's very narrow focus. But there still won't be enough money to deal with what the American Society of Engineers, of Civil Engineers, wants to make of this. And they're downplaying their number that they're already up playing. So $2.56 trillion, I think, is what they've been asking for all the projects that we need to do. So one of the ways you can do that, though, with the money that's on hand, that still keeps it within the budget of what's being presented here, is $100 billion in equity for an infrastructure bank, or 50 for an infrastructure bank equity thing, in this with $500 billion worth of lending ability, and in this bill, in the bipartisan bill, and then another 50. And then when you have certain circumstances and you get emergency funds, every so often, and this is just me thinking, and it would absolutely work, is that you could seed some equity in an emergency to the infrastructure bank, with the idea that, okay, you've got Atlantic City or someplace has been hit by a hurricane, we need to rebuild this area, and part of it's going to be done by emergency funds. Some of it's going to have to come in terms of, insurance that isn't paid, and the government has to go after insurance companies to make sure that they pay for the stuff they insured in the first place and the stuff gets rebuilt. But also, if the city or something is going, well, we need to build in such a way that takes into account, erosion because of climate change and those kind of things, then instead of giving them $10 billion as part of our $30 billion to help them rebuild, we're going to give them $20 billion directly, and $10 billion is going to go into the infrastructure bank for loans, private and public, to rebuild this area in terms of $50 billion or whatever, effectively like a bond for the city to help rebuild its stuff, that the government gets into the process of, and if they don't end up spending it, they don't have to spend it. They don't owe the interest on it. And therefore it can go someplace else. That equity still sits there. So let's say that city decides we only needed 25 billion of the funds provided through this process. We got 5 billion left over. That stays in the equity coffers of the infrastructure bank and grows it over time. So I am more excited about the infrastructure bill than anybody should be. But I honestly think this could be a turning point. Anybody remembers, I brought this up on Steph's show 9 years ago when I was on, and we were talking about it because it looked like it was a possibility. And then of course the Republicans torpedoed it back then. If it makes it, and here's the thing, even a small version of it, even a pitiful version of the investment bank, if they just decide, okay, 10 billion is going to this and we're going to have this as a little minor side thing, can grow over time through investment by the government as it continues to work. So that is incredibly exciting. Even if they don't go where they need to go, which is the 50 to $100 billion equity in the bank, the fact that they could go with 5 or 10 in this sort of pitiful starter kit version, this D&D for noobs thing that comes with all the dice you already need. That in and of itself is enough to get this ball rolling, where in the future budgets and the continuing resolutions and issues dealing with, you could put parts of like infusions into the infrastructure bank. You could put that into DOD funding if you're talking about areas around military bases. If you're talking about areas about, crucial infrastructure.
But
like
DOD
nuclear
funding
power
is
plants.
impossible to get approved.
That's right. Yeah. I'm just saying there's a lot of must-pass bills where you could, in the budget, seed money that's equity in this situation. By the way, that makes the taxpayer money technically because it is loaned into existence and paid back with interest into the system. So it makes cities less apt to use it for, pet projects that don't actually pay off. You know what I mean? Where you're building, the infrastructure bank is not where you're going to go to build a second St. Louis arc so that you can say the city team is sponsored by McDonald's. See what I'm saying? Like that, it has to be sort of material stuff because you're not going to waste it on that because you have to pay it back with interest. Now the interest rate on it's going to be very small, but when you talk about what kind of private investment is going to go into this? Now, who do you think is going to primarily invest in projects like this in small, we're talking 2.5%, 3%, maybe 5% in some cases, loans for certain cities that you can't trust. They're going to run DeSantis's credit and go, I don't know, the way you handled your citizens dying of COVID, we're going to have to charge you 21. We're going to check cashing store place, level of interest. What kind of money do you think is going to end up in these kind of systems, Johnny Million? It's not quite a quiz, but almost.
This kind of system is really foreign to me. This kind of system is really foreign to me. Like I never even understood the whole Fannie Mae thing when we were looking at house buying.
Right. Well, the general idea is that pension funds can put, because they have a certain amount, they have to keep up with cost of living and that kind of stuff, and it's a much lower, rate than say, what hedge funds expect, like 15% or 20%. But that's also, it's also you could lose it all. It's a lot more. It's more like gambling. Whereas if you have a pension fund, you want to be able to park those pension funds someplace where they're guaranteed a certain amount of it, and you're going to diversify. But an infrastructure bank is a perfect place for that because the government is guaranteeing the return on them. It will pay it back through toll roads or other things. That's how, a lot of these projects make their money back over time, that pays the interest on it. And the actual money itself comes from taxpayers inside the cities over time. You can spread these projects out. And so pension funds in the United States have somewhere in the order of $18 trillion of money just sitting in different investment schemes to raise money. And they are always seeking stuff that is, they're balancing their risk and safety. That's just the internal to the United States. Worldwide, in terms of the pensions we recognize or are intertwined with, you're talking about $40 trillion worth of money that could be invested in the private equity part. Like I said, when the government's talking about putting like $100 billion in actual equity in their cash to be loaned out, not the $1 billion that you can balance off that. Part of that equity funding would come from pensions who want to invest in something they can trust. And American infrastructure as an investment is a great idea. Our dams stay around for a long time. Our Army Corps of Engineers are fantastic. Our rules and regulations around construction are top notch. And it's rare when we have a building like we had in Florida. And since Katrina, the Army Corps of Engineers have been going around to every dam and levee, double checking and triple checking everything, because that's how you do it. And in some other giant countries with a lot of people in them that have experienced flooding lately due to dam breakages and the like, the opposite is true. They don't actually go check it. They go find the person that they can blame and dust that person off and go, we took care of it. So
we're pretty good at that too.
Yeah, not anywhere close to that level.
No.
Like we don't scapegoat. We're not even in the peewee leagues of scapegoating. We do it on Twitter.
Wow.
I'm talking about humans disappearing from the planet and us making a public statement about it. Right. Nowhere, and even like Russia and China think you're adorable right now. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk, streaming at infotainmentwars.com or fwank.com, FWANQ. You can like and subscribe to the show. Give us a thumbs up. Join us today. If you're on YouTube and you want to subscribe, that's great. Thank you. Those are joining us on Facebook as well. Thank you for the stars, and I see you and hi. We'll be back right after this. So the infrastructure bank itself has a lot of similarities with, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and more Fannie Mae, I suppose. But the idea of, loaning to both back government, government-backed loans so more people can afford to buy houses. And there's an argument to be made that as loans became more available and as the government entered the loan market as a potential guarantor, then the rates of loans that went out rose and the rates around those loans rose over time. And therefore houses got more expensive because of that. That argument, which is, worth having, tops out, unfortunately. And you have to deal with the reality that what we have currently is a supply problem almost everywhere. That's why home building is through the roof right now. And as we get better at it and quicker at it, and people start doing, prefab housing, or the tiny house fad for a little while did things, but that didn't last long because of COVID. COVID almost single-handedly killed the tiny house thing. You're like, no. If I'm going to be stuck in here with you idiots, I'm going to forever be looking at their family.
This tiny house with the exclusive condition that I would be able to leave and spend most of my time outside of this tiny house. Yes,
tiny house, big yard, I think is what you need to like. I need to go stand in the corner of the cornfield and scream. But that pretty much, nipped that in the bud. And so home growth and people's willingness to invest in their homes, and the idea that people maybe are moving more there's another suburban sprawl that's being created beyond just the regular suburban. Because the idea of the suburbs is that you live close to the city, but not in the city. And so you can kind of live a more pastoral existence within limits, still having neighbors and the like, but you can also get to work. It's drivable. You can either take a speed lane, or there's a train like the metro in Chicago, and those kind of things are available to you. But what we're seeing now is a sprawl beyond that suburb, which is, I have no intention of going into the city. I just want access to the cool stuff they have in the suburbs as far as movie theaters and coffee shops and stuff like that. Personality based, like Buckhead in Atlanta, like cool shops, nice walking area, but I don't have to live anywhere near it. And I can go even further out from that. And then working remotely becoming, a normal possibility. Now, I personally think we will see a fad movement in that big businesses, especially, and there's an increasing number of those, will want their workers to work close together because there's a lag time. Bad internet is one thing, but there's a lag time in decision making when people are working from home. And there's a question of productivity that I think a lot of companies are going to have to deal with, because I know that I am less productive based to some degree on the fact that my workspace is in my home. And I don't do spreadsheet kind of work. I can only imagine. I don't have an avoidance thing against my own work. I love doing it. I can only imagine if it was just, a stopgap
something you
job.
dreaded.
Yeah. I would never get around to it. I would be like, well, you got to take time for the kids,
The only way I can work from home successfully is if my job involves people pinging me all day long, which is what my job is.
To get you back to work. Right.
Not to get me back to work, but like my job is always just questions. People need me to solve questions, and so or to solve problems. So like if work is slow, then I've got some time to myself. But when I have to work, the work comes to me.
Yes, right. Well, and more people in your position will be finding a way that they can go further and further out as things become more digital. And then, as we get more comfortable, you'll end up with a live screen of somebody almost kind of 24/7 zoomed, going, and you just turn your camera on when you're working and turn it off when you're not, and yada, yada. Like that'll become normal as well as we get more satellite. And it's much to the chagrin of states like Wyoming and other states where you're going to find that like the tech, startups, once the internet gets better, they don't have to be near San Francisco and Oakland. Yeah. And in Cupertino and that. They can be in the middle of Wyoming where,
And getting the internet to the rural communities is going to be just a true game changer. It's going to change the way those communities work.
The social fabric of those places will change naturally because of that. And just like cable sort of changed, it made it harder to be that's why they're more my theory about why they're more virulent racists right now than there used to be is because the ability to be a soft racist was much easier before cable. You didn't experience anybody who was different, so it was easier for people to plant stuff in your head and go, well, I'd stay away from those folks if I were you. That kind of stuff. Like it was, you didn't have to say anything drastic. You could just kind of like, all carrot, no stick towards the racism in the racism race. But in this particular, once cable came around, you watch MTV, you watch, cable television from across the country. You're introduced to people that you might not have been introduced to. Yes, exactly. I love the 80s does it. I mean, I felt like I was building bridges. And certainly I would, that would argue that that Queer as Folk and shows like it had that kind of a reason was it introduced you to people you may not either be aware are around you or that you just don't have any interaction with. And once you know somebody or at least care about what happens to them, it's way harder for somebody to convince you to hate them because of their skin color or their sexual orientation, those kind of things. Just more difficult. And so those people get more frustrated that they're more and more alone at the lunch counter complaining about everybody. And instead of going, yeah, I hear you, people are going, will you get the hell out of here? And that makes them more angry and drives them to the internet and to QAnon forums. So that's the Cliff Notes version of this. The same thing is true about internet and the ability to work. It's not just that it's going to introduce people, because the internet, even at its worst, can introduce you to almost anything if you bother to look at it. Although most people, and I'm aware of this when I do it, spend all their time on the internet, considering the vastness of stuff that's on it, on 5 sites. Right. The Amazon, whatever, eBay, Etsy, Twitter, and Facebook, and Reverb Nation. Yeah.
No, Reverb. Do you not know about Reverb?
No. Well, I mean, maybe I do.
I'll have to send it to you. It's just it's the Chicago Music Exchange online, and it's just an amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing musician website
resource for yeah.
It's where I get like stomp boxes and drool over fancy guitars.
Nice. Well, in Reverb Nation,
without the yokels.
Some people don't know that Reverb Nation is actually a sort of a social media / electronic press kit site for bands to share with venues and that kind of stuff. And they kind of played footsie a little bit with, having fans on there and that kind of stuff. Have never really gained that footing, but it functions for that purpose. And I always thought that comedy needed one of those a lot of ways, and that ultimately Facebook is too broad for that kind of a thing, and having a specific one would be very helpful especially if you're a comedy or music fan. That's a cool way to go. So anyways, the issue we have with this sprawl that we're discussing is that what ultimately we have is a supply problem when it comes to housing. The entire and the rise in housing prices right now is hitting a glass ceiling of the highest prices available, for these houses, and that their worth just does not match them yet. And that what we're looking at down the road, a couple of years from now, is a surge in supply. And that there's a lot of home building right now because people want to, you make hay while the sun shines. And so people these equity firms and stuff are buying up housing, because real estate's a great investment long-term, no matter what. But if you get in at a high and then the housing market goes down, that's bad. And a lot of these companies that are doing that are actually facing that reality if they don't bail out in a couple of years. So what you're going to see is a lot of them just, that home prices, they could tank the housing market in about 2 years, just trying to get out as the supply starts to catch up with the demand. Because there's this delay caused by COVID was about it was more than a year in the making. There's always been a supply problem in the United States because they keep it that way. It's like doctors. The AMA makes sure there's only a certain number of doctors allowed to be licensed every year. So we're always short on them. So their price is high. Their pay is high. If we had as many as wanted to be doctors, it would, the general pay would go down, and they would be marching with the $15 an hour folks. So what we're looking at, and the word for that, folks, when that happens is deflation. Think about the reality of, and this is what the Fed has been talking about. This is what Barron's is talking about. This is what the Wall Street Journal is talking about. This is what CNBC is talking about. Even Maria Botox Romo, what her name is, on Fox Business, has been talking about the fact that while we're looking at inflation,
full name, by the way, she needs to rethink that.
I would change it. Yeah, most of the folks that are talking about this stuff, even the ones that are making politics out of the current inflation index, are staring down the barrel of horrible deflation in the future. And especially in the housing market, if it finally catches up. And don't get me started on once we start 3D printing houses, you're going to be looking at housing not being your primary investment anymore. Then where does it go? Yeah. Right? Then you're going to start wanting to loan your money to the infrastructure bank. I'm just saying, we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide. This is the nerdiest I get about something. I'm just saying.